Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel and I'm a professor of migration studies. So today I want to follow up on a previous video that I have done and posted, specifically looking at displacement and conflict-induced displacement. So in a previous video I really talked about the basics of displacement, the numbers. So for instance, nowadays, or at least in 2018, we have over 70 million people who are currently displaced because of conflict or violent situations. This includes refugees, asylum seekers, and also internally displaced persons. So what I want to talk about today then is what can be done. So after displacement has happened, what are solutions to actually solving the refugees situation? Now, according to the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, there are three what are called durable solutions. Now, I want to go through each of these one at a time and talk a little bit about what's going on within these durable solutions and what are the challenges. So these three durable solutions are return, local integration, and resettlement. So first, with return, this is of course one of the solutions that we would hope would be most viable and most possible. So return is basically having to do with the fact that people go back to their countries of origin, but of course they can only do this once it's safe, once they feel comfortable to actually go back, and hopefully that there's something to go back to. So when we're talking about return from a durable solution situation, we're really talking about chosen return. We're not talking about deportations, we're not talking about coerced return. But that is, of course, one of the solutions that a lot of people themselves would like to have. But given the fact that we know that many of the many of the refugees today are actually in a protracted situation, meaning that they've been displaced for 5 years or more, it looks like return is not often a viable option for many people. If we look at the average refugee today, they've actually been displaced for between 10 and 15 years. So here I'm showing you a graph of refugee returns actually between the early 90s and 2018. And you can see that just like with when displacement has happened, returns also kind of have ebbs and flows. So they have spikes where we see quite a lot of returns and then other periods where we see low numbers of returns. It's important to also remember that while people could be returning from one context, it's also very much possible that its displacement is still happening in another context. And what we're seeing nowadays is that, for instance, returns are not keeping up with new displacement, which is also why we're seeing more and more displacement over time. If you're interested to hear more about that, please check out my previous video on forced displacement. Now, coming back to returns, you can see here on this graph that there was a spike in returns around 2002, for instance. Do any of you have any idea maybe what was going on in 2002 and why we saw a lot of returns then? So think about what happened in 2001, September 11th. Then the US and coalition forces went into Afghanistan and actually overthrew the Taliban. And then we saw a kind of huge rise in hope in Afghanistan with a lot of return from the neighboring region. So we saw a lot of returns from Iran, a lot of returns from Pakistan in 2002, but also in kind of the 5 years after that. So the graph that I'm showing you now is obviously not only about Afghanistan, but the spike in 2002 is definitely led by returns from Afghanistan. If you also look at the 90s, we had a lot of conflicts during the 90s, but also a lot of stops of conflict during the 90s. So around 94, for instance, we see a spike there, and this is also quite driven by Rwanda and the stop of the Rwandan genocide and conflict. So depending on what was going on geopolitically at different times, you'll see different spikes in returns. Now, what's quite notable about this graph right now is for the past 10 years, we've seen much lower rates of return, even though we've been seeing increasing displacement. So that already shows that return as a durable solution is not really a possibility at the moment for a lot of displaced people. Now, another durable solution is what we call resettlement. Now, what resettlement means is that people are actually resettled to a third country that agrees to take them. So this is generally from refugee camps. It could be from refugee camps in Kenya or in the Middle East or many other places. But basically, countries abroad have to pledge that they'll take, for instance, 20,000 or 10,000 or 2,000 or hundreds of people from these different areas that are generally resettled to countries like the United States, Sweden, Canada, Australia, and others. But countries have to actually pledge the numbers that they agree to take every year. And there's nothing that says that countries have to do this. So resettlement is all basically out of goodwill of countries to take refugees and resettle them into their own countries and locally integrate them. Now, historically, we have some countries that have been quite good at that. Historically, Sweden, for instance, is one of the countries that is a percentage of their population that have been resettling some of the highest numbers of refugees. The United States, historically, has also been resettling the very large numbers or larger numbers of refugees in absolute terms. Not as a percentage of the population, because of course the United States has a very large population, but in absolute terms, they were a very important player in resettlement. What we're seeing, though, today is that resettlement has been decreasing drastically over time, especially with the current Trump administration. So resettlement has become less and less, also with fewer European countries being willing to resettle refugees, and a kind of global political climate that is not particularly welcoming to refugees at the moment. So this is particularly problematic. I'm showing here a graph of U.S. refugee resettlement numbers from the 1980s to today, and you will see that today are some of the lowest numbers that we have ever seen. And I'm quite concerned at the moment that the U.S. is actually trying to go to zero here, which is extremely problematic for different countries around the world. The fact now that the U.S. has closed its doors to certain countries that have had resettlement in the past, we know has had quite some serious mental health consequences, also for people waiting in refugee camps that have had the hope to be able to be resettled, especially to the United States, but also to other countries in the future, and they feel that all of their hope has now been taken away from the dreadful situation that they're currently living in. So resettlement numbers are not even close to keeping pace with current needs. So we talked already about the fact that there are more than 25 million refugees today, and in 2018, less than 100,000 refugees were resettled. So this is, a drop in the bucket of what the actual needs are, and I think that resettlement is often one of the big elephants in the room when we talk about clear solutions for refugees. Now, the final durable solution that is generally discussed is called local integration. Now, what does local integration mean? That means that refugees in the host societies and the host communities and the host countries that they are in are able to actually have a path to citizenship and a path to really belonging in that country. And many of the countries that are currently hosting refugees today don't have such a plan. They may allow refugees to stay there indefinitely, or they may allow refugees to stay there for a limited amount of time, but they don't necessarily allow refugees to gain citizenship and to have kind of all of the legal rights and responsibilities that their own citizens have. And this is particularly problematic because then people stay in a kind of limbo state of not being able, for instance, to resettle or go on to another country, not be able to return to their own country because of the situations there, but at the same time don't have real prospects in the current countries that they're in. It might even be more extreme. They may not have proper access to healthcare or education, and maybe also not access to the labor market. So situations of protracted displacement where these refugees don't have a good option to locally integrate is absolutely a problem. And we're seeing with many countries around the world today, while they might be willing to kind of host refugees, given the political situations in their own countries, they're often not willing to give more rights or to give paths to citizenships for the future. So what all of this means is that the three durable solutions that we currently have to deal with the refugee situation are not working. We're seeing increasing displacement, and we're not seeing increasing options for people to actually be able to live full, meaningful lives after displacement. So this is something that really needs to be worked on for the future. We need to also hopefully see the public start to take a different approach towards displacement, so the public in hosting countries, and hopefully we will see more resettlement in the future. Of course, what we'd really like to see is obviously a decrease in conflict and violence, and the ability for people to go back to their homes. The majority of people would really like to return to their homes, but that just usually is not a possibility for them. If you like this video, please like, subscribe to my channel, check out other videos on this channel, and especially the companion video to this one on forced migration. If you have any questions, please comment below, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.